So my neighbor was having some work done on their front yard, and they were just kind of having like this extravagant landscaping done. And I saw the gardener out there, and it was like 90 something degrees. And I called him over and said, "Hey, do you want something to drink?" And so I gave him some drinks, and it was just hot out there. I was trying to be nice. And the next day I saw him, and he was just kind of like going, he's being chummy with me, and he was telling me about all the work that he did and what he's about to do and this and that. And then he looked over at my lawn, and he kind of said, "Oh, maybe you can do this or that." And then he said something about, "Yeah, you'll have to ask your landlord."
Oh,
And I thought to myself, so the expectation is that I
don't.
can't own a home on this block when every single person on this block owns and occupies their own home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just little things like that. Like the expectation that people have of you is so low.
Mm-hmm.
The bar is so low sometimes that you can't even get under it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, and it's offensive. And it's like, it just kind of stopped the conversation there. And I just thought like, that was really rude. That was really rude.
Do you think that he was intending to be rude?
No, and that's the whole thing about implicit bias is that he probably didn't even understand or acknowledge that he used that terminology or that wording with me or had that expectation that I rent my home.
Mm-hmm.
He just
He just stated it
he
like it
just
was
stated
fact.
it. Yeah.
And there was the assumption
Mm-hmm. There was the assumption made. Yeah.
that you didn't own your home,
Mm-hmm.
even though you were clearly in a community where the majority of people there own their
Everybody,
homes. So,
yeah.
right. So the assumption should be that you own
Exactly.
your home. Okay, so talk to me about other implicit racist acts that you feel like you encounter on a regular basis, whether it's walking into a store and where things are located or things that people say. Just maybe enlighten us on some things that we might not even be aware of that you face on a daily basis.
I mean, like you said, just walking into a store, I can recall a story where there was a local store that I would walk into in my neighborhood, and every time I would walk into the store, I would hear over the speakers, "Security, please scan all aisles." I didn't really think much of it, and I walked in there several times, all the time, and I would always hear, "Security, please scan all aisles," like clockwork every time I walked into that store. And once I was like, this is just like, what a coincidence that it's always said every time I walk into the store. So I actually just walked around the store. There was nobody else in there. It was just me. And I went in a few more times, and the same thing happened. And I thought, they're watching me and they're targeting me. And the expectation is that I'm going to steal, or that people that look like me are going to steal from this store. So I asked my wife, who's Caucasian, to walk into the store and let me know what they said when she walked in. And they didn't say anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of goes to show what the expectation is for a lot of people, or what I have to deal with on a daily basis. And even going to certain department stores, you can kind of tell that people are watching you.
Mm-hmm.
Going to buy a car, you pick a car out, and the thought is, are you sure that's what you want? Do you know how much that cost?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
Are there things that we as a community would say to you on a more regular basis without thinking, like that gentleman said, the assumption that you didn't own your home? Are there any other things like that you can think of off the top of your head that are just these implicit biases or racial undercurrents that we just live under and don't necessarily recognize?
I think there have been several people who I tell that I'm a college graduate and I have a master's degree, and some people will ask, "Well, did you play a sport?" Well, no, I didn't play a sport. I got here on my own merit. Not that there's anything wrong with people that play sports, but that's expectation. And when I tell them, what I do for work or anything like that, it's almost like a surprise. Or are there times where people will ask, "Well, what do you do? What do you do?" And it's like, are you asking because you want to know what I do for work? Like, you're interested in that? Or you want to know, how did you get to where you are? Like, are you on the up and up? Like, it's things that are coded in the way that you're asked questions. And it's sometimes offensive.
Okay, I want to ask a really specific question. What terms do you have a preference, or is there a preference? Like, do you prefer being called black? Do you prefer being called colored? Are there terms that you obviously prefer not to be called, but just in the ones that like what terms are the most?
Definitely not colored.
Okay.
That is something that's like a very deep-rooted racist wording to call someone. You can call them a person of color, or a black person, or African American if that's what they choose to be called, but definitely not colored.
Right.
Right.
I think that's an important distinction. And some people might not know and say
Exactly.
colored.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important for people to know that that can be really offensive. But you can say a person of color,
Yes.
just not colored. So you're safe with black.
Yeah.
Black is always safe.
That's safe. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, let's see. Do you want to do a little like more defining of maybe just like a quick definition of implicit racism versus direct racism?
So implicit bias is something that these are the traits that are like deep rooted within us that we don't even understand that we do on a daily basis. They're discriminatory towards another race, color, creed, or religion. It's almost like plays on stereotypes that you think become fact about certain people. Implicit bias is going to be something as simple as you walking across the street. If you see a group of people that are not the same ethnicity as you, and you may feel threatened even though they're just standing there, assuming that a certain group of people like a certain thing or don't like a certain thing without you actually knowing that, and then you kind of just living your life in that space. That's kind of implicit bias, as opposed to overt acts of racism is when people hate you, when people specifically do things or say things with the intent of being hurtful or truly feel that they are superior to you just because of who you are versus who they are.
And the way you look. Yeah. The color of your skin. Okay. That's a good distinction. How do you think, or maybe we can find some resources. I think that we as a community probably all struggle with some implicit biases. And maybe we can come up with some resources that would help just make us more cognizant and aware of the things that we say or how we say them, the words that we use, and just being mindful and purposeful about even just checking our hearts and what we believe in our hearts to be true, and if there are things and underlying principles that we project onto people without even knowing them, and maybe just helping us be a little bit more enlightened to our own even unknown implicit biases.
Yeah, and a really good resource for that is it's something called the Harvard Implicit Bias test that you can do online. You can just kind of Google search it, and what it does is it gives you it's a whole system that was developed by Harvard, and it allows you to identify what your implicit biases are and what your leanings are and how you feel about a certain group of people, a certain religion, a certain gender, without even knowing. It just gives you word associations, and then you kind of match them up, and it'll explain to you, in a sense, why you did what you did or what your tendencies are.
That's great. That's so great. So we'll put a link to that so that people can check that out. I want to take that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah.